Some things change, but others stay the same, by Girlinpink44. Chapter 5. The Meaning of Legacy. The last time the Stark Expo had kicked off, Tony had been reasonably confident he wouldn't live to see the end of the year-long event. That being considered, and hidden from anyone and everyone, he had decided to make his entrance spectacular. This time, he was in a much better place, in more ways than one. Still, when planning his grand entrance into the much improved Stark Expo, he realised he still wanted to establish his flair for the dramatics. Which is why he found himself in a plane once again as it moved towards the site of the 2010 Stark Expo. One significant change was that instead of lasting 1 year, he had it lasting until mere weeks before the Battle of New York. The good press he'd still be riding when the battle came around would hopefully be a nice cushion for what lay in the days after. Unlike last time, however, the armour was much more advanced than it had been, though still a ways off from the version he wore in the final battle against Thanos. That being said, it was much easier to put on and would be much easier to remove once he made it to the stage. He'd also done away with the dancers. That was very much a past him thing that he wasn't overly inclined to repeat. This time he had kids and was focused more on his true legacy than the unsure version he had had the last time. Despite being over 10,000 feet in the air, he could hear the crowds below as they gathered in the centre arena of the fairgrounds. The main hall held over 10,000 people, and at least a dozen overflow stations had hundreds to thousands on their own. In addition, this was being televised around the globe and streamed on YouTube. Personally, Tony was curious if he could crash the system. There was one other change from the time that never was that he was rather happy about. This time, when he entered Iron Man into the Expo, he would be joined by his best friend in the War Machine armour. It symbolised the Stark Industries retained its ties to the US military, as long as it didn't involve weapons, and allowed him to share this moment with his best friend. It helped solidify that Rhodey would be by his side in the future. That the US military was firm in its goals for peace. The world didn't know that their view of, well, everything would change over the next few years. But by the time that happened, they would know that there were people who had their back. Approaching the drop window, the pilot's voice rang out over the plane's intercom system, and behind Tony, the door to the plane began to drop. It was showtime. The suit wrapped around him, the HUD scrolling on. Jarvis ran through the startup diagnosis. Everything looked okay on his end, and he could see that the final system checks were almost complete on the War Machine armour. Platypus didn't need to know that Tony had a monitor on the War Machine armour that fed directly into his heads-up display. It helped him sleep better at night, chasing the nightmares of his brother falling. Shaking away the thoughts, he looked out of the open door. Below, he could see the expo lit up to celebrate the opening ceremonies. "You ready, honey bear?" He turned to Rhodey. "Ready to beat you to the expo?" His best friend grinned at him. "Is that the way it's gonna be?" Tony smirked. "We have arrived inside your drop window. You are free to jump." The pilot cut off before more smart remarks could be shared. With a nod, the pair took off for the back of the plane as fireworks burst from below. They both jumped and let themselves fall momentarily before igniting their thrusters and soaring around the fireworks. As they approached the ground, the sound of roaring of approval grew louder and louder, along with the sound of classic rock. Many things had changed, but in his heart, Tony was still Tony. For a bit, the pair had fun. Despite the crowd below them, the pair enjoyed the fall, the ride and the race. Of course, there wasn't an impromptu game of tag that developed for a couple of seconds as they dodged each other and fireworks. Finally, they landed on the stage to the crowd's roar. The armour unlocked, and Tony and Rhodey stepped out. "Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel James Rhodes of the United States Air Force in the War Machine armour." Tony waved at his friend, who waved at the crowd before leaving the stage. Walking to centre stage, Tony felt the easy smile on his face. Back in this time, before the world got so very complicated. He did have fun talking with a crowd. Later on, it would become yet another exhausting chore. Perhaps, this time, he would change enough so that it wouldn't be. My dad hosted an expo during World War II. James Buchanan Barnes and Steve Rogers attended, according to reports. He then hosted another years later. But after his death, I've had no interest in hosting one of my own for decades. The crowd had quieted, hanging on to his words, because I didn't fully understand why he did it, what he saw in these events. But over the last year or so, I've started to understand. Before I start my speech, let Howard introduce the event. From beyond the grave, I give you my father, Howard Stark. The lights dimmed and the video began playing, the same as last time. Tony stepped backstage and took a swig of coffee. He also quickly changed into a tux. It was more comfortable to go casual in the suit if he could. As the video ended, he stepped out onto the waiting crowd. Legacy. Merriam-Webster defines it as something transmitted by or received from an ancestor or predecessor, or from the past. It's what we pass down to the next generation, to our posterity. It's what we leave as we walk upon this earth for those who will come after us. And, until I met my boys, until I met my daughters, I'm not sure I probably appreciated that term. A picture appeared on the screen behind them, and he heard the audience coo. It was a picture of the 4 kids all sitting together. Tony turned and looked at their faces and smiled. They're adorable. And I would do anything for them. Getting to know these amazing kids. And yes, I know I'm a bit biased. That earned a chuckle from the audience. Tony smiled, more genuine than he tended to show in such a public forum. He blamed the kids. Getting to know them, getting to help raise them, has fueled my desire to make sure that I leave a world behind that's better than the one I got. He shifted slightly. I like to think that I took a solid first step towards that goal when I shut down the weapons division of Stark Industries. But I also realised that an expo would be an excellent way to help the world advance and secure our legacy for future generations. That being said, welcome to the Stark Expo! He waved his hands and the crowd cheered. Behind him, a map of the expo grounds appeared. Over the next 15 months, companies worldwide will visit and share the latest innovations and plans to change the world. We have experts in energy, astrophysics, medicine, technology, and more present. In partnership with the United Nations, all signatory countries will have a booth to share whatever they want with the world. We have additional countries seeking to sign on for some or all of the expo. Tony hoped this would be a first step towards securing international allies. He was also really hoping it would make Wakanda poke its head out for just a bit so that he could establish contact. Live here in New York and online via YouTube, you can see it all. Every Friday through Sunday, we will feature the best and brightest minds making presentations on this stage. Throughout the week, there will be no shortage of exhibitions. The map shifted slightly, and Tony looked out at the crowd. Now available on the Stark Industries website is an application for STEM schools to apply for grants to help them bring their students to the expo. We also have appearances by Charles Xavier and his School for Gifted Youngsters. As the world's foremost expert on mutants, Professor Xavier will host several lectures, both here and virtual, about mutants and the X gene. His school will also be one of the recipients for the Stark Industries grant. But that's not all we have for the younger generation to enjoy. Peter looked around at his favourite portion of the expo. Granted, there was still a lot he hadn't seen, and he was so excited to visit everything, especially things that weren't here last time. He remembered running around the expo before the Hammerbolts ruined everything last time. There had been so much to see. And this time, there was even more. There was a monitor in his ear where he could hear his dad making his speech from the main stage. Hearing his almost cue, he smiled at Harley. Both were stepping in front of the camera, something neither had done in the previous timeline.
Let me introduce my assistants to show you a special section of the expo. Boys, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, mechanic, Harley spoke up. Hi, Dad, Peter added in. We'd also like to say a special hello to all of you in the main ceremony and the people on YouTube. Harley waved to the camera. Now that you've listened to the boring adult speeches. In Peter's ear, he heard his dad make a noise of incredulity, and Peter couldn't help but laugh. Don't call it boring, Harley. I thought it was cool.
Thank you, Peter.
His dad's voice rang through with warmth, only reserved for a few people. There were still days that Peter couldn't quite believe that Tony Stark was basically his dad. Not even basically. He wasn't Peter's biological dad, and he wasn't Uncle Ben. Even though he had his Uncle Ben back, something else he couldn't quite wrap his head around. There was still a Tony-shaped place in his heart. For the briefest of moments, one that had emptied as the man's heart had stopped on the battlefield. Shaking away the thoughts, he often shoved them to the back corner of his mind, not to be addressed. But now there were people he needed to talk to. So, Dad mentioned that there are many cool things for adults. But he asked us to share what there is for the kids. And there's a lot, Harley butted in. And it's so much cooler than the stuff for grown-ups. He turned to Peter. Where should we start? How about the fair? Part of Stark Industries' new initiative to support STEM schools is the launching of the world's largest science fair. You can log on to their site for registration information. After a series of interviews, the best from around the world will be displayed here and judged by leading names in science. Harley ran ahead and Peter took off after him, letting Harley set the pace so that he didn't accidentally give away his enhancements. With being more in the spotlight as Peter Parker this time around, he was already wondering how he'd juggle Spider-Man. Perhaps it would be a way to avoid being Tony Stark's kid. Plus, he desperately missed swinging through the streets of New York. It was almost an ache how much he missed it. Their feet echoed on the platform, hinting that air was beneath them. They crossed a roped bridge and paused. Next is the Emporium. 6 stories of learning experiences. Peter admired the building. What had once been an abandoned office building on the grounds had been transformed into a giant science space for kids. Inside there are exhibits that will rotate every few months. There are also representatives from various schools, as well as Professor Xavier's school as well. There's chemistry and physics and engineering and robotics and more. Harley rushed the sentence, not even pausing for breath. We plan on spending time exploring everything, Peter grinned, and there's so much more. There's a fair with rotating attractions, a giant playground, which includes the world's largest slide. And there's a large video game exhibit with all the major developers and a lot of new independent talent. Now, we know that video games aren't just for kids, but it is adjacent to our area. Did we miss anything, Dad? He had a chuckle in his monitor.
You two did great. I can take it from here.
Perfect. Harley turned to his right. Because speaking of the world's largest slide, I think it's time for Peter and I to properly check that out.
Have fun, you two.
We will. Harley took off and went down the slide. That's all from us. Peter waved shyly at the camera. Back to you, Dad. And he took off for the slide himself. In a room behind the stage at Stark Expo, a pair of spies sat on a wall of monitors. On some of the monitors were security feeds from the grounds. Another had a broadcast of the live feed. Still other had text scrolling down them.
So, Vanko Sr. worked with Howard Stark?
Clint didn't look away from his monitor. Nat looked away from hers and turned to her partner. Correct. Apparently he tried to sell some Stark plans to the Soviet Union back in the day. Stark Sr. had him deported. Vanko Jr. isn't thrilled at Tony's newfound resurgence of fame.
Of course he isn't,
Clint sighed. Before Nat could respond, one of the computers beeped. She turned to the monitor and read through the information. It looks like Vanko just landed in Los Angeles. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. I really like the Peter and Harley bit. Oh my god, you can tell that those boys are having fun. And oh god, you can tell that Peter's struggling with his issues. Poor boy just needs a cuddle. But I think running around with his brother and going down the world's largest slide with him is going to really help him out. And I love that Tony again mentions his daughters with an S. I love that he's including Abby. Maybe it's just me, but I like the little side characters that mean so much to the main ones. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.